This is our second lesson in microeconomics on supply and demand. We'll do some review questions on demand and then introduce supply. We'll look again at shifts in the curve versus movement along the curve. We'll look at the law of supply, and we'll look at determinants of supply. In other words, events that shift the supply curve. So shifts versus movements along the curve. So we'll do a little warm up looking at demand, and we're going to look at demand only at this point until we switch to supply. So decide whether the event shifts the curve or whether there's a movement along the curve. And if there's movement along the curve, let's see if there's an extension or a contraction. Decide in which direction the curve shifts, and use the supply and demand diagram to see how the shift changes the equilibrium. Consider the market for minivans. For each of the following events, describe what happens to the price and quantity demanded of minivans. So people decide to have more children, and we are looking at quantity of minivans and the price of minivans. That's the market that we're tracking. And if people decide to have more children, then the demand will increase for minivans. So the demand curve will shift from D1 to D2, Q2, Q1. And here's our new price, P2. So we can see that price has gone up and quantity demanded has increased. The price of station wagons increases. So again, remember we're tracking quantity of minivans and price of minivans. So it's not the price of the good in question. So we have not moved along the demand curve, but we have the price of a substitute having increased. So because the price of station wagons has gone up, more people will buy minivans. So the demand curve for minivans is going to shift to the right, D1, D2, and again we can see that quantity has increased and price has increased. A stock market crash lowers people's wealth. So people have less disposable income now, so they're able to buy fewer goods. So again, tracking minivans, price of minivans, so quantity of minivans and price of minivans. So now the demand curve will have decreased, having shifted it to the right, to the left. And it would make sense if it's less in demand that the price for the good has decreased, and so has the quantity demanded. And the price of minivans rises. So because we are tracking minivans and the price of minivans itself has changed, we're going to move along the demand curve. We don't know what's created this, but we're going to move from this point, the price of minivans rises. So the price is going up. We move to this point, B, Q2. And just like the law of demand, which applies when you are moving along the demand curve, we have price is up and quantity demanded is down. The inverse relationship that we see with the law of demand. So does a change in consumers' tastes lead to a movement along the demand curve or a shift in the demand curve? Well, we don't have a movement along the demand curve because the price of the good itself is not the determining factor that's changed. So it must be a shift of the demand curve. So this is just a little tester. The law of supply. So this is very important to realize. So other things being equal, or ceteris paribus, the quantity supplied of a good rises when the price of a good rises, and vice versa. So in other words, if the price of the good rises, producers will supply more. Their quantity supplied will increase. And if the price of the good decreases, their quantity supplied will decrease. And this happens for several reasons that we'll look at. Oh, so what is another way of saying all else equal? The ceteris paribus. What determines the quantity a producer supplies? As price increases, there's more incentive to produce more because of the higher profits. So the suppliers will work harder and longer and so on. And also less efficient producers can enter the market. There's also another reason why the quantity, why as price increases and quantity supplied goes hand in hand. As you use more and more of the scarce resources to produce a good, so you're increasing your quantity supplied, the opportunity cost also increases because you're using resources that might not be allocated towards as efficient production is taking place, and goods are becoming scarcer that you might be using for inputs, so they're becoming more expensive. So we're moving, so when price changes, we move along the curve. Now what happens if something other than price changes, so non-price determinants? And when we're talking about price, we're talking about the price of the good being sold. So input prices. If input prices rise, so what you need to manufacture, such as labor, raw materials, expenses of the building, etc., then there is less incentive to produce as much because it's less profitable, and the supply curve shifts left. We say supply decreases. Technology. Technology can make production more efficient and supply can increase, so shift to the right. Expectations. If you expect the product's price to rise in the future, you may store some of your product and reduce production today. Or you may start increasing production now if you expect price to increase due to increased demand, but again, store some of your product. Also the number of sellers. As the number of sellers or firms increase, the supply curve will shift to the right because there will be more people producing this particular good. Subsidies. Subsidies are payment to producers by the government to reduce the cost of production. And we'll look at this more in depth at a later time. But subsidies will shift the supply curve to the right or increase supply. But when we look at it, technically it's actually being shifted down, but not to worry about until we cover that later. Taxes will effectively increase the cost of production. So then the supply curve would shift left, and when we do taxes in depth, we actually see that it will be shifting up, but not to worry about that at this time. Another non-price determinant of supply is the price of producer substitutes. So goods which the producer could produce instead of the existing product. So imagine a producer that could produce both skateboards and roller skates. It's very similar technology and the manufacturing is very similar. If the skateboard's price is increased, there would be movement along the supply curve for skateboards. Remember the law of supply. But assuming that the producer can switch relatively easily between skateboards and roller skates, there's going to be a shift left for the supply curve of roller skates. Because what's happening here is if the price of the good you're tracking, so the price of skateboards goes up, then you have a movement along the supply curve for skateboards. You're going to respond by producing more and quantity supplied goes up. But when we look at a different product other than skateboards, if the producer has switched their production more and more to skateboards, it means that they'll be making less or fewer roller skates, and so there'll be a shift left for the supply curve of the roller skates. So let's see what's going to happen for the market for sweatshirts. So a hurricane in South Carolina damages the cotton crop. So we have to think, is that going to affect consumers or suppliers, at least initially? So we're going to see that it's going to affect suppliers because there'll be less cotton to use. And so the supply curve is going to shift to the left. We'll call this S1 and S2. We'll call this Q2 and P2. So what's happened in the market? Well, the price has gone up. Quantity supplied has gone down. And you might say, well, yes, but consumers are affected. Well, yes, absolutely, consumers are affected. What's happened is that we've moved from this point to this point. And in terms of how the consumer's affected, they are reacting to an increase in price. They're moving along the demand curve, which is a contraction along the demand curve because they're now demanding less goods. And so their quantity demanded has also gone down. So it's not to say that the consumers haven't been affected, but they've been affected by the reaction of the suppliers. The price of leather jackets falls. So this is a price of substitute goes down. Now, if the price of leather jackets falls, consumers will be aware of that. And given that the price, that we're going to assume that the sweatshirts and leather jackets can be substitutes, it's a little bit of a stretch, but if the price of the substitute goes down, what will happen to the demand? So let's make sure that we're tracking sweatshirts here. So there's absolutely no confusion. So quantity of sweatshirts, price of sweatshirts. And if I didn't put this on the axes of the previous slide, you should. Okay, so the demand for sweatshirts will decrease because people will buy more leather jackets. D1, D2, Q2, P2. Okay, so if we look at compare and contrast, the 2 points, we know that price has gone down, and we know that quantity demanded has gone down, which makes sense because sweatshirts are now in less demand. So we'd expect the market to respond with a lower price, and we'd expect less to be purchased. Have suppliers responded to this? Again, absolutely. We have a movement along the supply curve from the one point to the other point. They're responding to the decrease in price by decreasing the quantity supplied. And if we look at what's happening along the supply curve, because we are supplying less, we've had a contraction along the supply curve. All universities require morning calisthenics, in other words, exercises in appropriate attire, meaning sweatshirts. So again, quantity of sweatshirts, price of sweatshirts, and because people now have to wear sweatshirts, whereas maybe they didn't before, we're going to have an increase in demand for the sweatshirts. D1 to D2. We'll see that the quantity has gone up. We'll see that the price has gone up. So price has gone up, quantity demanded has gone up, and in reaction to the higher price, we know that quantity supplied has also gone up. We've moved along the supply curve. We're supplying more. So again, along the supply curve, having moved along it as well, we have an extension along the supply curve. New knitting machines are invented. So again, quantity of sweatshirts, price of sweatshirts. So the knitting machines are used to make the cloth, and we can assume that it's a better technology, or we could say that the new knitting machines are actually used to make the sweatshirts. At any rate, the supply curve will shift to the right, because of new and better technology in the production process. We'll have S1 and S2. Here we have quantity, and here we have price. So we know that the price has gone down. We know that the quantity supplied has gone down. And in response to the lower price, we know that our quantity demanded has gone up. So has there been a reaction by consumers? Yes. We've moved along the demand curve in response to the lower price and are demanding more. So I like to give this a happy face, because the economy likes it when the price goes down and quantity goes up. Thank you.